Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. You are watching Women's Who Live here on Ahlulbayt TV. First and foremost, I send my condolences to all of you on this tragic day of the martyrdom of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. And it's in light of the martyrdom and the sufferings of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam that tonight's topic is quite an important one, quite an emotive one. Inshallah, today we want to discuss the abuse of women in the communities and in our respective communities in light of the suffering of Fatima Zahra. You know, we hear about so many cases, so many problems that women are going through. Perhaps we don't hear about the issues and you know, the various problems that women are facing within our communities, and maybe this is exactly why we need to discuss it tonight. As always, I'd like to remind the viewers that this is a live show. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love for you to join in to the discussion. If you have any comments, questions, if you have any experiences you'd like to share, the number is on your screen, 0203 4117 842. You can email womensforyou@ahlulbayt.tv. You can tweet, as some of you have been doing, and inshallah I'll read your tweets out. And finally, you can comment on our Facebook page. And I think that's pretty much all the ways that you can get in touch with us tonight. So without further ado, my guest tonight is someone you may have seen previously on Reborn, Sister Shabana Bibi. Thank you so much for joining me tonight on the show. We've had, I mean, I was just going through the tweets that we've got in response to tonight's topic, and you know, there's a mixture of things being said, and one of the things I'm sure our viewers might be wondering, judging from the tweets, and you know, the basic question of why is this topic so important? Why is it worth discussing this evening?
I think it's really important to discuss in light of especially Sayyidah Fatima Zahra, because when we commemorate what happened to her every year, I think we need to remember that what she suffered was a form of extreme abuse. Now, abuse can come into many categories, and when we think of abuse, we always seem to think of physical abuse, but abuse can be emotional, it can be psychological, it can be physical, and it can also be sexual. And now, when people, a lot of what happens in abuse is that the power to do as you will is taken away from you. Okay, so the power of your rights are taken away from you. And what Fatima Zahra had done to her is that she not only had her rights taken away from her, she was physically abused. And every year we remember that. And every year we cry for it, but we forget about the thousands of women in our communities that are silently crying because they are going through similar things to what Fatima Zahra did. And unfortunately, they're not getting the support. Now, if we look at what happened to her, she didn't get the support at that time. In fact, if you look at the speech that she made at Fadak, she was asking people, why are you not supporting me? And now exactly the same thing is happening to the followers of Fatima Zahra, where they are being abused and they're not getting the help that they should be getting. And if something is allowed to perpetuate, it will only end up getting worse. And I think this, in the light of the abuse of Sayyidah Fatima Zahra, we need to stop this, and we need to commemorate her abuse through actions and not just through our tears, although the tears are important, but now they need to manifest themselves into actions.
Definitely. I mean, this is clearly, you know, a very sensitive topic, a topic where, you know, I know a lot of people may have experiences, may have personal experiences. I mean, when these things do happen, when women are, you know, maybe taken advantage of, or maybe they're not granted their rights, things like this, what is the community's perception of women then? Because in order for someone to usurp the rights of a woman, they must have some kind of incorrect perception. Perhaps they don't understand the status of women. Perhaps, you know, they've clearly overlooked something very important in the being of a woman.
I think that's definitely the case, and I think it's the reason for that is twofold. I think firstly, it's not just within our Muslim communities, but you look at society at large and the perception that they have of women. I mean, if you look at pre-Islamic Arabia, women were treated like objects. They were treated almost worse than animals. They had no rights at all, and they were objectified. If you look at society now at large, exactly the same thing is happening, where women are now being objectified after years of them fighting for their rights. It's almost as if we've gone backwards, and women actually don't think there's anything wrong with that, because it's almost like the norm. Now, if you look within our own communities, I find that there's almost a contradiction between what the women of the Ahlulbayt were like and what we perceive as being the correct way a woman should act. So if we look at the great women in Islam, so you look at even going back to Bibi Khadija, Sayyidah Fatima Zahra, her daughter Sayyidah Zainab, they were all very strong women. And you know, they were never women who sat quiet in the face of oppression. They always spoke up. But yet if you look within our own communities and you hear the word strong, it's always used in a negative light. I've always heard people say, oh, she's a strong woman, and what they're referring to is a woman who's very controlling, maybe doesn't have as much control of what she says as what she should, and you know, wants everything her way. And that's what they deem as being a strong woman. Well, to me, that's not a strong woman. In fact, that signifies weakness, because in Islam, we are told to control ourselves. You know, we fast for 30 days in order to control our soul. So why is it that when a woman doesn't have control, she's deemed as being strong? But that is actually a form of weakness. A strong woman is somebody who acts like, say, the Fatima and say the Zainab, but that's not portrayed within our communities. And it's almost like as if to be that is something that's wrong, because if a woman does speak up, she's automatically labelled as a troublemaker, somebody who you need to watch out for, somebody who's almost isolated and ostracised because she speaks up. But if you look at Islam, that's the complete opposite.
Do you think this kind of misconception, or this wrong idea of strength, this incorrect notion of strength, you know, where does it come from? Is it a cultural thing? Is it just, you know, just something we've grown up with? I mean, where does the root of the problem lie?
I think it's both a cultural thing, and I think it's something that's at society at large, because if you think about it, I mean, I've heard so many saying, if you really want to know the state of a true nation, you look at how it treats its women. What a just nation would do is to empower its women, but there's many people who think that that is quite dangerous to empower women, because that's where you get the whole loss of power, etc. So if you look at it throughout history, the one group of people that is always targeted and always demoralized are the women, and unfortunately that's rolling now into the Islamic community. The sad thing is now that it's almost synonymous to Islam, when it's got nothing to do with Islam, but because now we are a Muslim community and we're bringing in what maybe other cultures have got, or society at large is now thinking of women, it's giving Islam a very negative perception. And I think people don't see the bigger picture, that it's not just about your culture, you are representing Islam. And you know, in a climate where Islam is already getting a bad press and women are seen as oppressed in Islam, this doesn't really give us a better image. So I do think partly it is cultural, because a lot of the cultures that Muslims belong to, if you look at it, women are degraded, women are treated like almost slaves for men, where they don't have their own, they're not allowed to have their own opinions. In certain cultures, women shouldn't ever be educated, even though Islam you know, promotes education for women. So I think it all comes down to that, and it comes down to pressures in society where women have to be a certain way. Nobody dictates to a man how they should be, but it's always dictated to a woman how they should act like. If they don't act in line with society, then they always almost they come down upon a lot more than what men are, and it's a shame that we feel as if we have to dictate to a woman how she should be.
Yeah. As always, I like to remind the viewers that this is a live show, and would love to hear your comments and, you know, any experiences, any questions you have. One of the questions that, again, just going through the tweets and kind of getting a general idea of, you know, what people are thinking about this topic tonight. Some people might be wondering how common, I mean, the kinds of experiences you're referring to, how, you know, is it that common in the community? Because, you know, as I said at the beginning of the show, these aren't things that we hear about very often, but clearly they do exist. You know, just because we don't hear about them doesn't mean it doesn't happen. But how common is it, and how big a problem is it? Is it just, in a way, you know, some people might argue that this kind of, you could say it is oppression of women. This is just a part of a bigger problem. And that bigger problem is that, you know, just communities have failed to distinguish between their respective cultures and Islam. Or is it a much bigger problem?
I think it started off with communities not being able to distinguish between religion and Islam. But I think, unfortunately, what's now happening is that it's almost like our communities are going backwards and bringing pre-Islamic ideas back into our communities, where and I've even heard of cases where, you know, I was speaking to somebody and she actually said to me, and this was actually a matchmaker who said to me that women should accept that they are going to be treated like objects. They should expect that, and they should accept that that's how they're going to be treated, like by men. And unfortunately, this sort of mentality is now creeping back into our communities. I don't think it's just primarily a cultural thing. I think it's the lack of knowledge of Islam, because if you truly understood what the Prophet's mission was, and he came to liberate women, if you look at his early mission, there was certain things that he spoke about. One of them was equality of all races, and then he spoke about women's rights. And I think because we're forgetting the core principles of Islam, what's happening is that we're almost going backwards, and everything that he came to establish, we're now slowly losing it. So I think it does, a part of it does come from our culture, but part of it is from, I think a lot of it is from the upbringing. And we hear, like I've heard all the time, you know, well, not all the time, but it's quite common that parents bring up this sort of, they bring up this perception that women are somehow lower than men, and that there's this sort of feeling that there's this inferiority complex with women. And I think that belongs to certain cultures where where men sort of rule, and we know Islamically that men and women have different roles, but they are equal. So yes, men are the heads of the household, but it's almost taken a bit too far, where it's because he's the head of the household, that means that he has ultimate control, and therefore control to then almost, which then turns into abuse. And I think it's that misinterpretation of the religion of Islam that leads to the abuse.
I'm just going to read out the response we've got on Twitter with regard to tonight's topic. So we asked this evening on Twitter, do you think that women are granted less preferences or fewer preferences than men in our communities? If so, why? So one of the responses is just a one-word response, but I'll read it out anyway. It's from a brother. He just said the word ghira, which, for those of you who don't understand, if I'm not mistaken, this kind of refers to kind of a protectiveness. So I don't know if you know what I mean. So, you know, an older brother might have that protective feeling over his younger sister. And if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, this is what I think the viewer is referring to. Another response that we got is from Sayyid Nishar Haidar, who says, because we have left Islam, picked only those which we felt is good and left the rest of them. And finally, we have a response from someone called Hashimi. I'm not sure whether this is a brother or sister, but this is an interesting response. He or she has said, "What suffering? They do what they want, exercise every right with vengeance. What suffering?" So again, you know, we've had a mixture of responses, and this is why I asked, you know, how common tonight are, you know, people who perhaps have, this may be the first time they're hearing of anything like this.
Well, I just recently found out exactly how common it was, and I think when I came on my Reborn show, I mentioned that I wanted to do something about abusive women, and I mentioned that I had this Facebook group called Voices Against Oppression. Ever since then, I've had women actually come to me and tell me their stories, and I knew abusive women existed. I was absolutely shocked about how common it was, and I've asked if I could relate some of their stories, which they said it was fine to. And I had this one woman who contacted me who had got married at a very young age, and she was incredibly naive when she got married. Her husband was considerably a lot older than her, and what happened was he controlled her. At first it started with, you can't see your family, you can't have any friends, almost isolated her. Then it started with domestic violence. Now this man put her in hospital because that's how much he physically abused her. She accepted it all because she was a devout wife, and she was made to believe that's what you do. You don't leave your husband, you just put up with it. What she didn't realise is that she had 2 children, and what she didn't realise is that her husband was actually almost poisoning her children's mind against her. He made her work to call her money off her, left her in debt, and has now moved out of the house, left her, he remortgaged the house loads of times, left her in thousands of pounds of debt. This is a woman who doesn't have a stable career, can't really earn, doesn't have a very good wage. She's been paying for the maintenance of the house, the mortgage, etc., everything, and she's left in debt. And she went to numerous people for help. Nobody helped her. And now her husband wants to file for divorce. Now she's put a condition, that's fine, but can you please pay me back the money that you owe me, because I've been paying for your on your behalf. And she's told numerous people that that is her actual, that's her condition, but yet nobody wants to fight for her. Now this is a woman that's left all by herself. She's had everything taken away from her. Her children don't want to know her. She's left in debt. She's been physically and emotionally and psychologically abused for years by this man, and nobody in the community is willing to help her. What does this woman do? And you know, the response of one person was, go and charge him and take him to court. That's all good and well, but I know women who have been to court for domestic violence. It is one of the most toughest things you will do. Who is there to support this woman through the most hardest time of her life? Because standing up in front of a court full of people, where you are going to be almost be proven to be a liar, because that's what's going to happen, having your most intimate events of your life being told in front of all these people, who is going to support her through that emotional journey? And it seems that the support that should be there isn't there, because people are denying, like, you know, that this abuse even exists. And if we know that if it could happen to Sayyidah Fatima Zahra and that was abuse, then why can it not happen today? And it is happening today, and this is one of many stories that are out there.
I do want to follow up with some questions on that, but we do have our first caller on the line. Assalamu alaikum. And I think okay, unfortunately we've lost that caller. I hope they call back, because it'd be interesting to hear what they say. The question I had in mind was, you know, so this individual goes to the community asking for help, and, you know, she was turned down. like myself, again, I'm sure the viewers are probably wondering the same thing. You know, what was their reasoning for turning? I mean, logically speaking, you know, we'd all like to think that if someone in this situation came to us, we would be more than willing to, you know, help out an innocent party. But again, you know, but then people don't, and we wonder why. But before I let you answer that, we do have our caller back on the line. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Alaikum salam, brother. Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Birmingham.
Okay.
I just have got a very, very polite request.
Go ahead, brother.
We are talking about Bibi Fatima Zahra salamullahi alayha.
Alayhi salam, yeah.
We being Shias and on a Shia channel, could you please address this honorable lady with respect by starting with Bibi Fatima Zahra salamullahi alayha, rather than just saying Fatima Zahra, please.
Inshallah. Thank you, brother. Thank you for your call. Okay. Thank you for that call, brother. Inshallah, we will address Fatima Zahra alayhi salam with respect. And again, we have another caller on the line, so they are coming through quickly. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, sister. You've got a nice topic here today. It's very sad. The only thing I can say is that education is lacking in both parts. First of all, we pick and choose which elements of Islam we want to practice and implement in our daily life. And from the woman's part, it has no rights, and the man feels he has all the rights. So we are lacking in education, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, but I think alongside telling a woman what her rights are, we need to also start to establish those rights, because I think at most part we kind of have a vague idea of the rights that we have in Islam. But the problem is that those rights do exist there. The reason why women are being abused is because those rights are not being implemented. So we now need to be a bit more active in actually implementing those rights for women, because they've existed and they are there and they've existed for 1400 years, and we know one of the main missions of Islam was to liberate women. So we know that exists. So we do now need to start implementing them, as well as educating.
Sister, are you still on the line?
Yes, our religion is the only religion that actually gives woman every right. She just doesn't know. But then it becomes a power game. My only, point is that sisters and brothers, they need to go out there, research what has Islam given them. Islam is the most complete religion ever known. The Western world is coming to rights of women now. Maybe Fatima Zahra and the Prophet's family had left it for us for a long time ago, through the Prophet's family. I think it's all about education.
Thank you very much for your call, sister. Sorry, would you like to add anything?
No, I just said never call ever, but alhamdulillah, it's a really nice topic, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you success.
Alhamdulillah, thank you so much for calling, sister.
Khudafiz.
Khudafiz. We do have just under a minute of the show left before we go off to break, but that was, the sister didn't say anything incorrect. Regardless of whatever issues we're facing, probably the primary way to address it, the primary way to kind of even prevent any problems within our community from happening is to educate ourselves about our rights. But we have come to the time where we do have to go for a short break. It's been a brilliant show so far, and inshallah we're looking forward to having more callers and more tweets and more Facebook comments, inshallah. So please don't go away. We'll see you in a few minutes. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. You are watching Women's For You live here on Ahlulbayt TV. First and foremost, condolences to all the viewers and the Imam of our time. May Allah hasten his reappearance on the martyrdom anniversary of Fatima Zahra alayha salam. As always, this is a great night, and tonight we also have a very relevant topic, a very important topic. Many of you have been trying to call in, many of you have tweeted, and inshallah we'll try and get as many responses from you into the show as we can. Tonight's topic, for those of you who have just tuned in, is the abuse of women within our communities. Prior to the break, we kind of read out a few tweets and a few responses from the viewers, and we were asking, how common is this issue of women perhaps not being given their rights within the communities, and women's rights being abused in the communities. But before we do go on, I'd like to remind the viewers that this is a live show. We'd absolutely love to hear from you. If you have any questions, any comments, if you have any experiences, any feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Please do pick up the phone and join in. The number is on your screen, 0203 4117 842. You can tweet me, you can tweet at Ahlulbayt TV, you can comment on our Facebook page, and finally you can email womensview@ahlulbayt.tv. Prior to the break, we had a wonderful caller who I can't quite remember if I thanked her, so thank you, sister, for your call. And she made a very good point, which is that perhaps these problems wouldn't be so common if everyone just knew their rights and the rights of others, and so I guess we would be more aware if we are infringing on someone else's right, or if someone is taking our right. I guess sometimes you're in that situation where you don't feel too good about something, but there's nothing concrete for you to go on and say, hang on, this is my right. You just think, oh, well, it's upset me a little bit, but I'm not sure if I kind of have that power to do something about it. But yeah, I mean, how important is it not to just know about our own rights, but also other people's rights? And how important is it that, this is a two-way street? I guess we said during the break, because in response to one of the tweets that perhaps was very skeptical of, what kind of abuse goes on in terms of women's rights being violated. How important is it that we are also aware of the rights of men, as well as men being aware of our rights?
I think, like you said, it's a two-way street, and it's important that men and women do know each other's rights, because we don't live in isolation, we live together. Yeah. So I think when we talk about women's rights, we seem to isolate it. Yep. And I think the two need to be spoken about hand in hand and together, because obviously men and women were made to to get married and to live together. So as a result, they're going to interact, and you need to know what rights you have over each other and what rights you have to each other, and that's really important. And I think, like we said, I think you said, is it really common? And I think one of the reasons why people don't know how common abuse of women is because women are reluctant to talk about it. And I think the reason why they're reluctant to talk about it is because, firstly, they think that nobody's going to believe them, because we live in a society that's very male-dominated, and we live in a society where almost, women have to go out of their way to prove their abuse, rather than them just being blamed. They'll be questioned and blamed all the time, and also there's the issue of confidentiality. And if I tell somebody, is it going to leak out? Is everybody going to find out? And if you've been abused, it's very hard to even speak about it, because abusers take away your self-esteem. The reason why they can actually abuse you is because they've made you feel almost like as if you're worthy of abuse. And women tolerate it for that long because they feel like as if they deserve it. And that's why the abuse can carry on for so long, because they just think that that's something that they should, that's something that they've maybe brought upon themselves. And I think this is why it's important that we do highlight the issue and we make it clear that abuse is not something that the woman should be ashamed of, because it's not her fault. But too often it's deemed as something that the woman should be ashamed of and shouldn't talk about. Yes, it's a very private thing, but she should never be ashamed of the fact that somebody has abused her. And yeah, don't go and screaming it from the rooftops, but you should never be made to feel as if you're in the wrong because you are the victim. And I think that's one of the reasons why we don't hear about it. It does exist, and it has always existed, and it exists in every community, not just the Muslim community. But because of the aspect of the shame, because of even if the woman is believed, we've all heard that, okay, so what does she do? You know, what does she do to bring that all upon herself? And it's these questions that a woman who has already been through so much can't bear to have almost directed towards her. And I guess we're not experienced in tackling abuse. And I think we need to acknowledge it first and then find ways of dealing with it.
We do have a caller on the line. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Alaikum salam, sister. Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Birmingham.
Okay, lots of callers from Birmingham today. What would you like to say?
I'd like to add on something to something that Shabana mentioned earlier, actually, about you know, we don't realize how many issues that we do have within our community as a whole Muslim community, because we just don't talk about them. You know, when have we ever, you know, attended a discussion or a workshop or something that, you know, really tackles around the subject of abuse against women? You know, I think it was maybe last week I attended a workshop when they just started talking about abuse against children. You know, we had someone come in and speak to the children at madrasa and tell them, you know, these are your rights. This is what you can do about them. We've never had that for women. You know, and it's a lot more common than we realize. A friend of mine, she was engaged, and, you know, this person, like, it started off as just, you know, verbal abuse, you know, taking a dig against her, you know, her physical appearance or making her feel like she's not good enough. And then I think if you start off like that, it can get even worse. When you allow something like that, it just shows people that, you know, they can do that to you. Then, like, it went on to physical abuse. She told her family, no one did anything. Because they weren't even married, it was just engaged. And obviously people, you know, they have this bad idea that, you know, you can't walk away, like, you can't end things like that. So you just have to kind of suck it up and just go with it. And then it gets worse, and then in the end she left him like a week after the wedding. And it didn't have to get to that stage like this. And plus, at the same time, there's only so much that you can, you know, talk about your rights and stuff, unless you actually do something about it. And I think the part where we really mess up on is that bit, because not only, like, some women, they you know, they may, you know, speak up. But then that's all they'll do. They won't do anything else. And again, I think nowadays talking is not enough. You have to actually do something about it.
Okay. Thank you very much for your call, sister. I mean, I'm going to play devil's advocate here and, you know, kind of ask again. You know, the sister mentioned the example of child abuse as well. Do you think that just, again, abuse in general is just the huge problem that perhaps gets brushed under the carpet very often? And I guess women's abuse is one branch of it, child abuse is another branch, and there might be, you know, a lot more going on as well. You know, again, so abuse is kind of the common denominator here in terms of what kind of gets ignored, what people don't want to help out with. Is abuse just that one kind of no-go area where everyone doesn't want to go, or is it just when, you know, or is it a much broader thing where perhaps just anything that goes wrong in the community, perhaps no one wants to own up to?
I think it's a bit of both. I think nobody wants to be the one to stand up and
kind of be the whistleblower.
Be the one that starts to talk about these taboo issues. because everybody's afraid and everybody's scared. And not just about the issue of abuse, and there's another particular issue that I spoke up about. And somebody actually came to me and said, you know, I wish I could stand by you, but I'm scared.
Yeah.
And I'm scared of the backlash. Because when I spoke about abuse in my Reborn show, I actually had people say to me, what is she talking about? She's just making things up that doesn't exist in our community. So it's when you do speak up, you will be seen as the person who's just causing trouble.
Yeah.
You just love to be a troublemaker, love to be controversial, and nobody wants that. And I think, especially if you come from a very small, tight-knit community, nobody wants to rock the boat. They don't want to tread on each other's toes. They just, and I've heard this so many times, that's just the way it's always been. You won't ever be able to change it.
Yeah.
And I said, you can't take that you can't have that attitude, because how will the community ever progress if you're just letting it, letting it almost slide into this whirlwind of just, going,
kind of letting it become normal.
Yeah, letting it become normal, and then what else is going to appear? Because, if you normalize one form of oppression, then something else is going to appear. And I think, as a community, and it's not just, and I hear this all the time, we talk about our own little communities. Well, we're not just little communities, we're an ummah at large. And for the sake of this ummah, we have to help each other, because Islam is one religion that has this concept of the ummah.
Yeah.
No other religion has it. The Prophet, peace be upon him, came to establish that. And how can we therefore just let things be, you can't speak up, the oppression will be everywhere. No, you can't, because it's the concept of the ummah is that you help each other. And when one, I grew up hearing this hadith that the ummah is like a body. When one part of it hurts, the whole body hurts. And so therefore, if a group of people are suffering, you can't be quiet, because Imam Hussein said, those of you who are silent in the face of oppression are exactly like the oppressors. You cannot sit there silent. And unfortunately, that is happening because people are scared to speak up about controversial issues, because they don't want the finger to be pointed at them. Abuse, it's if you speak up about abuse, why? I think, like you said, it's not just abuse, it's many other issues. But I think there needs to be a change, because otherwise, unfortunately, our communities are going to almost self-destruct. And none of us want that to happen.
Again, I'm going to come back to that, but we do have a caller on the line. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Alaikum salam, sister. Where are you calling from?
Salam to your guest. I had a comment and a question. The first comment I'd like to make with regards to the show that you're doing today, mashallah, is that I'm very glad to see that Ahlulbayt TV has taken the initiative to discuss a taboo subject such as the abuse of women within our society. Because, as you've discussed in the show, it is a common phenomena, and although it happens across communities, with a religion like ours that teaches such rights of women in general, it is a shame that it seems to persist within our community still. The question I had was with regards to women's abuse. What do we do next? I mean, it's all good talking about raising awareness, which is obviously the first step. But beyond that, what physical measures would you recommend that the people take? I mean, your guest cited an example of a lady who was suffering from domestic abuse, and she decided not to go through the courts because of the troubles associated with doing so. But if we look at the example of Bibi Sayyidah Salamullah alayha, she did go to court to fight for her rights. And even though there was a lot of trouble associated with that, there was a lot of pain associated with that, she did that because that was a physical measure and an action she could take to sort of ascertain her rights. Living in, alhamdulillah, we live in a country whereby women's rights are embedded within the law of the country, and the police, for example, or our legal system in general is very useful and helpful when it comes to abuse towards women. And though there may be a lot of taboo or shame associated with this within our communities, there shouldn't be a reason for us to restrict ourselves in accessing these kind of services that are available to us. But obviously that's just my opinion. I just wanted to know what you guys thought should be the physical measures that we take to fix the problem once the problem has occurred.
Okay. Thank you very, very much for your call. Again, it's an interesting question, and just before we address that, one of the things that I wanted to say in response to just prior to the call was that I guess one of the difficulties is that, like you said, we are, you know, it's not just about individual communities, it's about, you know, the entire Muslim nation and our collective outlook on things. And so I guess one of the difficulties is that there might be certain individuals like yourself who are, you know, more than willing to help people out when they are being abused or their rights are being violated, but perhaps, to put it in layman's terms, we just lack the manpower, because the other, you know, I'm not going to put a number on it or a percentage, but seemingly the vast majority would kind of shy away from it, not because they think it's okay or not because they want it to continue, but because, you know, you gave the example of the lady that said, oh, but I'm scared of what might happen to me, or, you know, people are kind of skeptical to get involved. So, you know, that's one of the problems I see, but how would you respond to the caller?
I think first and foremost, when a woman is being abused, she just wants to be believed. I think it's so important that a woman has somewhere to go and someone to go to and say, look, this is what's happening to me, and just to hear her out, because these women have kept their abuse hidden for sometimes months and sometimes years, and they need somewhere to go to and just say, look, this is what's happening to me, listen to me. And without having to prove and say, look, I know, like the woman that came to me kept on saying, you know, I can show you evidence. I know you won't believe me. And I said, I do believe you, because it's always the perception of I need to go above and beyond, you know, my means to prove that I'm not lying. And so I think there needs to be a system in place where you can go and listen to a woman, where a woman, can be listened to. Secondly, abuse destroys you emotionally and destroys you psychologically, and there needs to be a system in place in order to empower that woman and bring back her self-esteem. Because if you're talking about going to court, she needs that to be able to allow her to be able to go through the process of going through court and getting her justice. And so we need to have counselling for women. But as soon as you mention the word counselling, it's such a taboo. It's like, this woman must be crazy, there must be something wrong with her, she's mental. That's not what counselling is. Counselling is whereby we acknowledge that your mental state of mind is important. In Islam, we know how important your mental state of mind is. So therefore, there needs to be a counselling system in order to help these women to regain that confidence that this abuser has taken away from them. And I think it does start with that. And then there needs to be some sort of system in place of where we are changing the perception, because it is about changing hearts and minds, changing the perception of women in our community, and changing the perception of the fact that it's not the woman's fault, and it is the abuser's fault. And so we need to change, rather than thinking that the man, which so often happens, can walk through the community with his head held up high, everybody knows what's happened, but nobody treats him any differently, and the woman is the one that's isolated after everything that she's been through. And I think we do need to, like you said, educate and change hearts and minds. But there needs to be an actual system in place, and it starts with acknowledging the abuse of women, because if you're denying it, you know, how are you going to help these women? And the caller said about there are organisations in place. There are organisations, and I've been speaking to some of them. And I spoke to, for example, Women's Aid, which is a very common organisation that helps women who have undergone domestic violence. And they are getting more and more women coming to them. But I just think it's so sad that the Muslim community are the community that have a prophet that came to liberate women, but yet they have to go to non-Muslims to get the help. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with going to non-Muslims, but they have to do that because there isn't a system in our own communities. And the question is why? Why isn't there that help not available in our own communities where there is outside? And a Muslim woman shouldn't have to feel like that's the only way she's going to get help. Yes, by all means, you know, these organizations are very helpful, and you know, they guide you, but at the same time, shouldn't that guidance be coming from amongst our own communities first?
Yep. You touched on going to non-Muslims for help, for example. Kind of sidetracking slightly, but we do have 5 minutes, so I will come back onto the topic. But do you think that women, perhaps not abuse, or in a way, I mean, depending on what definition of abuse we use, you could say it's abuse, but do you think that women's rights are violated in non-Muslim and secular society as much, but perhaps in different ways? Or do you think that perhaps we are lagging behind as Muslims?
I think Muslims, generally, women's rights are taken away in pretty much all societies. Like I said earlier on, when, you know, women it seems that they're the most easiest group to oppress, and that's always been the case in history. However, I think what's happening within the Muslim community is because of the lack of education, Islam is always used. And you know, no Muslim woman wants to do something that is against her religion. So it's always Islam's telling you to do that. Islam gives me, like I said, I'm the man of the household, therefore Islam gives me the right to rule over you. And I think that's what's happening within the Muslim community, whereas Islam is used as a scapegoat for abuse, and I think that's what we need to change, and that comes through education and action. You need to have the two together. You can't just have the education, because say if the education is never acted upon, how is that going to help the women that are being abused currently?
You kind of touched on upbringing and the kind of perceptions of women that people are brought up with. Do you think perhaps that might be the prime time to incorporate, you know, this education that we're talking about, the education of your own rights, the education of the rights around you, and, you know, I guess you could say that age when you're being brought up is prime time, but also in terms of practical steps that we could take now to educate even people who might be a bit older, maybe the older generation, who might have misconceptions. How do you think we might go about doing that?
I think obviously all ages need that education, but I think the important thing is, remember, when women are being abused, it's not just the women, the children in that relationship are also suffering. And like I said, I was talking to people from organizations who deal with women's abuse, and they actually said when there's an abusive relationship, if the child is a boy, they find that more than likely when that child grows up, he seems to think it's perfectly fine to then treat a woman like that. So it is important to address it from a very young age, but through helping a woman that's being abused, you're also helping a child, because children will always reenact what they see, and it does affect them psychologically, and they seem to think that it's normal. What they see has a huge impact, a much more impact on them than what they hear. And that's why I said we need to do it through actions, because if women are being treated equally and they are given their rights, that has a far greater impact than somebody standing there and saying these are the rights of women. We need to actually start acting upon what our religion gives to women, and those are God-given rights. They're not given to a woman by a man, they're God-given rights, and we need to make sure those rights are established. And those rights, if they are being taken away, we empower a woman with those rights, and we make sure that we as a community take the responsibility to give them back.
Completely agree with what you've said so far. You know, we do need to educate, we do need to implement, and I guess in a way set an example for children, for other people in the community. And also, we just to summarise for the viewers, because we are going off to a break shortly, but we've kind of spoken about potential practical steps that we could take. So you mentioned counselling, systems in place to kind of help women deal with the psychological damage, you could say, that abuse does. In terms of, this is kind of the burning question for me, I completely agree with what you've said. We do need to educate ourselves, we do need to educate others, but again, we have such a massive population of Muslims, we have such a massive, even if you looked at individual communities, even these so-called individual communities are massive themselves. So, we are going to go for a short break in about 30 seconds, so I will let you answer afterwards. But my question is, how do we get everyone on board? Because it's very difficult to let an idea grow when there's only a few people backing it up. But we do have to go for a short break now, so we'll continue this discussion. Thank you so much. It's been a brilliant discussion so far. We'll see you in a few minutes. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. You are watching Women's View live here on Ahlulbayt TV. First and foremost, condolences to all our viewers on the anniversary of the martyrdom of the Lady of Light, Fatima Zahra alayha salam. Tonight's topic is a very relevant one, especially in the light of the suffering of Fatima Zahra alayha salam, and that is the abuse of women in the community. Prior to the break, we were even before we got into the discussion, we were addressing whether this actually is a problem or not, because, as you said, unfortunately, it is something that a lot of people find difficult or don't want to come to terms with. As always, this is a live show. I'd like to remind the viewers you're more than welcome to call in. A lot of you have already. A lot of you have been tweeting, and inshallah we've got some new tweets. I'll be reading those out shortly as well. Would love for you to get involved. If you have any questions, experiences, comments, the number is on your screen, 0203 4117 842. You can tweet me, you can tweet at Ahlulbayt TV, you can comment on our Facebook page. Prior to the break, I asked a bit of a daunting question, which is that, so far we've listed a few practical solutions, or perhaps not solutions, but practical steps to reach a solution in the long term. And we've spoken a lot about educating ourselves, educating those around us about their rights, about the rights of women, about the rights of men, and even kind of taking practical steps in terms of what do you do if you know someone is being abused, or what do you do if you are being abused. But the question I asked prior to the break was, it's all well and good for us sitting here to want to help to eradicate this problem, to want to do something about it. But as we know all too well, the vast majority of people, either they, for whatever reason, they don't want to get involved, they don't want to kind of come on board. But in order for the problem to be eradicated, obviously we need everyone on board. So how do we do that? Is that even possible?
My honest answer, no, I don't think it is possible.
Yeah.
Because I think we need to take lessons from history.
Yeah.
And if you look at it, our beloved Prophet came to liberate women. Mm-hmm. And he faced so much opposition, not just for liberating women, but all the principles that he stood for. And I think if you are going to stand for the same principles he did, you are going to face the same oppression and the same opposition. Yeah. And there will be 4 groups of people. Like I know, because I've spoken up here, there will be 4 groups of people that I will face. There will be the group of people who will support me, and not just support me through words, support me through actions. There will be a group of people who will agree with everything that I've said, but be too scared to actually stand by me. Then there will be a group of people who will say to my face, yes, absolutely, I agree with everything that you said, behind my back do the complete opposite. And then there will be a group of people who will be outright opposing everything that I said, because that's exactly what he faced, and that's exactly when you stand for his principles, you have to be prepared to face exactly the same thing. There were very few who followed him in his time. There will be very few who would follow you if you're standing for those principles. If you look at the Ahlulbayt, that's exactly what happened to them. They stood for those very same principles. They were oppressed, tortured, martyred for it. They didn't go through all of that for anything other than standing for those same principles. So yes, it is a big step, but it is a very rewarding step. And it's a step to actually show your allegiance and support to the personalities that you remember all the time. So in short, no, you won't get everybody on board. But the people who are willing to, they need to stand together to try and change things. And also, it's important that it comes from the abused woman herself, because you need to realize that you have not done anything wrong, and the strength needs to come within you, because if you think about it, Allah does not give a test to somebody unless they can bear it. So he has chosen you for that test because you can bear it, and you've got the strength to bear it, and you need to realize that this test is actually a blessing as well, because he's making you stronger, and he's making you stronger for a greater purpose. And women need to realize that. And I think if you reconnect with Allah, and I know it sounds like a cliche saying this, but if you do, you will find that inner strength. And you need to find people, and you know that there are people, because people have called in and said they know that abuse exists, to help you. And there are people, they are very far and few between, but they will help you. And this test is going to show you a lot. It will show you who your real friends are. It will show you who you need to keep in your life, and who you need to who's not good for you in your life. When you come out of this test, you will see that it's a lot more. There's a lot more blessings in it than what you thought. Yes, what's happened to you is horrific, and it will always be horrific. But you need to think about what Allah is trying to show you through this test, and it needs to also come from the women. The women who are abused have to find that inner strength, and that inner strength does exist because Allah has given you this test because you are strong enough to bear it. And so in short, no, not everybody is going to be on board, and I think there will be very few people on board, because history is testament to that. Yeah.
And yeah, makes perfect sense. We do have a few tweets, as promised. I will read them out. Sister Zahra said, we pray Muslims will catch up to Islam in their treatment of women. Educating ourselves and other women on how to recognise abuse is not enough. We need to speak up and act against it. Which is basically echoing what we've been saying. But on a more on a more not appropriate, but on the note of tonight, or today rather, which was the martyrdom anniversary of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. I mean, this topic is extremely relevant, not to her, but because of her. And as you said, at the very beginning of the show, that it's because of personalities like Fatima Zahra alayhi salam that we have an example to go by, and we have a guideline to go by when our rights are taken. That we shouldn't be passive. And again, I don't know if it's a cultural thing that we kind of spoke about this at the beginning of the show when you were talking about the kind of incorrect definition or idea of strength that people have in our community, or not just in our community, but the Muslim Ummah at large, that we don't equate strength that we talk about today with the strength that we saw in these holy personalities when they did face oppression, when they did stand up to injustice. And we spoke a little bit about, is it cultural, is it not? Do you think it's even, how do I put this? Do you think sometimes maybe the fact that hijab comes into play here, do you think maybe people have a misconception of hijab, and whilst hijab in some ways is kind of covering yourself, not isolating yourself, not secluding yourself, but keeping that barrier between yourself and society or those around you. Do you think that maybe a contributing factor to this silence, to this kind of lack of being vocal, is due to people perhaps misunderstanding the purpose of hijab? Because I would argue that hijab is one of the things that allows us to speak out, whereas maybe some people, in my experience anyway, some people might use it as an excuse not to speak up.
I think it's more our culture, and I think it's more the fact that it's not the done thing to do for a woman to speak out.
Yeah.
And they should just be patient. That's what's used. Be patient. That's not being patient. When you are suffering oppression, you should not bear that oppression like that. You should stand up against it. And I think people use the word patience in the wrong way, and that's exactly an example of it. If you're saying hijab, there is no one who did hijab better than Sayyidah Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. Yet she went to the courtyard and she spoke for her rights, and she even addressed the people. In fact, I was reading the infamous speech of Fadak today, and she addressed the people and said, "You're not standing up for me, you're not supporting me." So she spoke about it at that time. 1400 years later, women are still suffering in silence and nobody's defending them. And then you go to Karbala, and we say that Karbala didn't start at Karbala. It started with the usurping of the rights of Imam Ali alayhi salam and Sayyidah Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. It started there, and that's what resulted in Karbala. In Karbala, Imam Hussein alayhi salam stood there, and what did he say? He called out Hal min Nasirin Yansurana, not because he knew people were going to come and help him, but that call was for the generations to follow. And that call was when he was at his most oppressed state, all alone in that desert. Yet you roll on 1400 years later and women are silently screaming that same thing. Nobody's answering that call because that call is still echoing in the desert. And I think these are all excuses that are being used not to answer that call, because that call was for all forms of oppression. It wasn't for his oppression as a personality. It was the oppression of the principles that his grandfather came to establish, which are being destroyed. And that is exactly what's happening with the abuse of women. And that's why we do need to actively answer that call.
Going by the example of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam, her rights were usurped and she fought for her rights. And in light of this, I mean, I think we've got about 15-ish minutes of the show left. But in light of this, I know it's a very big question, it's very little time to answer such a huge question, but in light of what she did, what can we say Islam wants women to be like? Because there is what society wants women to be like. There is what perhaps people who don't really mind women being abused want women to be like, so that they want women to be passive and just take it. And you gave some horrific examples of people saying, well, you should be expected to be treated this way, and that's all what people want. But what does Islam want women to be like?
I think, well, from my lack of knowledge and my understanding, Islam never wants you to sit there silent in the face of oppression. If you are being abused, you have the right to speak, and you have the right to demand help. And if your God-given rights are being taken away from you, women are a blessed creation of Allah and they're being abused. How can anyone sit back and watch the creation of Allah be disgraced and not think that this is something that they need to speak the loudest about? So Islam does not require women to be passive at all. And you do need to speak. From my own experiences and my own experiences of abuse, the community are not receptive to that. The community want people and women to be silent. And I know that when I was speaking for help, nobody helped me. And it was all just, why can't you just be quiet? You know, people, nobody will take it as far as what you are, to try and make me feel bad. And I think from my own experiences, nobody's there to help women, and women really need to take the step in order to help themselves. And this is why I keep on saying, make your connection with Allah, because when you feel like you've got no one else there, you need to realize that Allah is always going to be there for you, and through that you'll find strength. And I think, you know, through my own horrific experience, that's what I've learnt from it.
Okay. I will come back to that, but we do have a caller on the line. Assalamu alaikum.
Hello, alaikum salam. I've been listening to your discussion very intently. Can sorry, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yes. Can I make a couple of points here, please?
Yeah, sure.
If I remember rightly, there was mention of a comment whereby the husband thinks that he has a right over the wife. Let me correct you. No husband has a right over his wife. He has a right of love, not of abuse. All right? If we consider Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and Ma Khadijatul Kubra, they were equal partners at equal level. And if we believe in the Holy Prophet, then we have to follow in his footsteps. The second thing is that the man who abuses his wife, if you try to educate him, he will not want it, full stop. So you'll be knocking your head against a brick wall. What I would advise a woman to do is take the authority in her own hands. She's to sit at the table with her husband and have a clear conversation. Look at him in the eye and say, you will not like being insulted like this. Either you stop it or I take the matter further. Because what happens is, in this situation where a woman turns to anyone, she herself will feel inadequate. And where she has been brought up well, she's in a partnership with a man who keeps abusing her, then basically he's a wrong partner for her. So she has to take authority in her hands and sort him out by herself. I hope you do agree with my advice. I'd love to have comments.
Okay, thank you very, very much for your call, sister.
I think in some cases women can do that. In other cases, women are terrified of these men. And it takes quite a strong woman to be able to sit there and say that to her husband, not knowing what the response is going to be.
Yeah.
If you are being abused, and if this man doesn't think twice about abusing you, most men who are abusers like the control. There you're taking the control out of his hands. What is going to be the response? And that's what puts a lot of women off, because they're scared of what the response will be to them sitting at a table and actually putting that to their husbands. And so therefore maybe they require an arbiter, and Islam does talk about having arbiters, and that's why I think they are asking for help, because maybe the husband will listen to somebody else more than what he will listen to her.
Yeah, because I was just going to ask in response to that, I mean, my question's coming from a good place, but my question is, you know, are there times maybe when it might be wiser for a woman not take matters into her own hands, but if you're in a state where whoever your abuser is has no boundaries and no limits, perhaps for your own safety and your own well-being, is it better to maybe, you know, go to someone else for help?
I think sometimes you need to deal with it yourself first, and then you do need to seek help from other people. And here's where I would like to relate my own story, because I think I tried to do the two. Both were unsuccessful, but I wanted to deal with things myself. Now, I was in a situation where I was speaking to someone for the purpose of marriage, and what happened was I knew the whole entire family. Speaking to this person always said that they wanted to marry me. what I didn't realize was that that was all a lie. And actually what was happening was that he had no intention to. What then happened was when the topic of, okay, let's sort this out, let's get married, came up, he turned around and said, my parents will never allow this because you're not from the same race. Which then I thought, okay, that's odd. And then he said, I'm depressed, I'm going to kill myself because of this, I've got a heart condition, etc. My family's split, all split up, you split up my family, they don't want to know me, I'm not eating, I'm not sleeping, etc. All of this was to make me feel like as if I've destroyed someone else's life. What then happened was I then thought, okay, I need to ask for help, because if this person is suffering and going through such a hard time and I've done this to this person, then I need to go and ask for help, because it's an issue of racism. I need to go and ask for people to get involved in the community. I went for help and everybody passed me on like a parcel from one person to another because nobody wanted to get involved. Now, from the background that I'm from, my family's not Shia, and I don't have a male representative. Therefore, I wanted to find a representative from the community. Nobody was willing to represent me. What then happened was that I decided to approach his mother myself to speak to her about the issue. She didn't want to know. And I did it in exactly the same way as, say, the Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. I went to the mosque and I asked to speak to her. She said, don't want to know, I don't even want to speak to you. Then I decided to go to other people from the community for help. And the community were saying, we don't know what you're talking about. His friends are saying he's not depressed. And I said, no, he is, like, he's throwing up in front of me, saying he's got a heart condition, etc. He is depressed. And anyway, to then cut a long story short, what happened was eventually we went to his parents without a representative from the community because nobody would represent me, even though I had knocked literally on everyone else's door. And I went to the parents and the parents turned around and said, he's not depressed, I don't know what you're talking about. He hasn't even approached us about marriage. And it was all a lie to try and almost emotionally and psychologically destroy me, and to the fact that I had destroyed somebody else's life. I then started to obviously, because I started to ask for help from the community and they didn't like the fact that I asked for help from the community, what happened was, I have quite strong instincts. I had instinct one day that something wasn't quite right. And I looked on Facebook and I thought, oh, his cousins had removed me from Facebook. I thought, that's odd. And then I realised his sister-in-law, who added me onto Facebook, had removed me, and I knew straight away there was something wrong. The very next day, I get a phone call from the police, and I was put into a police station being treated like a criminal because they had tried to stop me from going to the mosque, stop me from speaking to people and isolate me, until I told the police my version of events and showed them all my evidence. They turned around and said, it's you that's been abused. The police actually said to me, you should be glad that these people aren't in your life because they don't seem like very good people to me. I then went to the community and said, look, I'm the victim. I'm being treated like the criminal. Help me. Nobody helped me. And I was the one who was actually called a troublemaker, who was actually isolated, who was deemed as being the bad person. Yet the person who abused me is walking perfectly fine. And that is emotional and psychological abuse. And everybody says, you should be grateful. We have women coming to us all the time in a worse situation than you. And I said, well, then you should have dealt with this with the first woman that came to you. Why has it got to this point? And people were saying, why are you taking it this far? No other woman would. And I said, look, now you've got a woman that is taking this far, support me. And nobody would. So it makes me wonder, not that, I am grateful that, it wasn't as bad as what it could be, but what else are women facing out there that you are openly saying there are women who are in worse situations than you that you're not doing anything about? Like I said, that call is not being answered, and yet I am being lied about, continuously lied. The story has changed so many times. The community don't believe me, yet I've got so much evidence to prove my case. And I now know what women are feeling like, and this is why I'm so determined. Okay, my case has ended, and I'm so glad that, alhamdulillah, Allah saved me. He really did, because that was not a good family for me. But I'm now determined to help other women and to stop this from happening, because it has gone too far.
It has indeed. I'm so sorry we have run out of time, but thank you so much for joining us on the show and sharing your story. I'm sure there are women and men perhaps even who can relate to tonight's topic, a topic that's probably relevant for all of us at some point in our lives. But to our viewers, thank you so much. I know we've got a few messages, a few tweets. Unfortunately, I don't have time to read them out, but we will get back to you, inshallah. Thank you to our wonderful guest. Thank you to all our callers. And inshallah, we'll see you next week at the same time, Thursday, 8 p.m. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.